My sermon title this morning is, What Happens When Life Overwhelms You? When life overwhelms you. And all you have to do is live for a little while, and you will come to a place where you feel overwhelmed by what it is that you're walking through. You're going to feel like it just simply is more than you can handle, and that you're not sure if you're going to make it. We are all well acquainted with it. Unfortunately, some of us encounter it much earlier than others. We'll read from time to time about an infant that's born with a horrific illness. Sherry and I were watching TV the other night, and this is, it's not something that's new to us or that we're unfamiliar with, but it was interesting to see it on TV, and these little children looking to be early elementary, born obviously in a third world country. That in and of itself would be enough to be introduced to stress, being born in a third world country. But these little folks had various iterations of a cleft palate. And it was just such a tragic thing to see. And within the culture that they live, that makes that child an outcast. We look at it, and for us, it's simply a medical issue. They need to have that repaired so that they can go on. But a friend of mine has done some work in South America, and within the South American culture, those children become social outcasts. The mother becomes not a mom, and it's very easy for the husband to shun the mother and the child, go off and find another wife and start another family. So we're not talking about just somebody needing to have a bit of cosmetic surgery done. We're talking about something that has dramatic stress. Some folks get introduced to that earlier than others of us, but we all get introduced to it sooner or later. My text this morning is about the issue of stress and the ability that it has to make us feel overwhelmed, and that fear usually becomes a variable in the equation at some point. That when we feel overwhelmed, fear begins to have its impact on us. One of the things that we have been dealing with, some of you have so kindly asked about Mom and how Mom is doing. One of the things that is a common problem for a person with dementia to have is that they become very fearful because they know that they don't remember like they used to. Now, I don't get how that works. They're losing their memory, but they know enough to know that they're not remembering what they should remember. And it causes them to become extremely fearful. And this extreme fear causes them to lash out. It causes them to be 180 degrees from the person that they had been all of their lives. And it's because fear has begun to grip them. There's a sense of overwhelming. We would sit with my mom in the early stages of her hospitalization. We would sit with her, and she would recite all of our family, all the children's family names, or children's names, and it was like she was cramming for a test. She was trying to remember them and not forget them. And it was scaring her to death that she couldn't do that. And we find ourselves with different expressions of that going on in our lives. You may have a health situation in your family that you don't know how to deal with, or you may have a job situation that you're trying to wrestle with that just seems to be overwhelming to you right now. And fear can become a part of the feelings and the emotions that you are trying to cope with. The author of our text today is none other than David himself. If you want to turn to Psalm 3 in your Bibles, or if you want, you can simply turn your attention to the screen behind me, where you'll find the text there as well. As I'm sure you can imagine, David, being the king of Israel, was quite familiar with stress. When you're leading a nation of people, one of the common things that you have in leading any group of people is stress. Because people have this wonderful quality that they fall into, and that's that they don't always get along. Can anybody identify with that? It happens at work. It happens in families, in the larger families. It happens in families at home. It's sometimes difficult for us. And so, as it is for all of us, David certainly was well acquainted with the subject of stress and feeling overwhelmed. I wonder, wouldn't it be great when we get to heaven, we could talk to David and ask him, how did you really feel when you stood in front of Goliath? What was that like? Because, on a good day, David probably was about 5'7" or 5'8", something of that order. And here's 9'6" Goliath towering over David. It would be interesting to hear what his emotions were. Suffice it to say that he knew what it was to be under stress. But David says some very interesting things in this psalm that we're going to read. And I want to draw your attention to this morning for this reason. A lot of times we read the Psalms as poetic language. What I mean by that is we will in poetic language, we will use things like, your eyes are as blue as the ocean, okay? Or your cheeks are rose red. Well, okay, your eyes may be blue, but they're not blue as the ocean, and they're certainly not the ocean, right? And so we have this use of language to try to create a picture for us. But I want you to watch the words of Psalm 3 very carefully, because there is something that I want to bring to your attention that makes this psalm a very dramatic reading for us this morning. O Lord, how many are my foes? Many are rising against me. Many are saying of my soul, there is no salvation for him in God. But you, O Lord, are a shield about me, my glory, and the lifter of my head. I cried aloud to the Lord, and he answered me from his holy hill. By the way, the two words there that we didn't read, Selah, that's usually a praise interlude. That's a time for them to stop. And so could you back up to that? So very likely, what David is doing there is he is stopping and he's thanking God for something that he's just spoken about in those opening 3 lines, and then in the next 4 lines. And so he's pausing to reflect on them and to give praise back to God for that. Okay, let's go on. I lay down and slept. I woke again, for the Lord sustained me. I will not be afraid of many thousands of people who have set themselves against me all around. Arise, O Lord, save me, O my God. For you strike all my enemies on the cheek. You break the teeth of the wicked. Salvation belongs to the Lord. Your blessings be on your people. Selah. I want you to listen to those words, to hear them, and to think about them, because there's a little historical fact that we haven't mentioned yet that makes these words become extremely powerful. If you look right under, in your Bibles, right under where it says Psalm 3, there is a title comment. What does it say? David wrote this psalm as he was fleeing from his son, Absalom. Do you know what that does? That takes this language out of poetic use. And now these words become extremely instructive words to us, especially when we go back and look at what David was doing as he was fleeing from Absalom. And so as we look at this psalm this morning, I don't want you to think of it as sometimes the language of poetry that will tend to glamorize or romanticize something. I want you to hear what David is saying, because David is speaking very real words from his heart as he reflects on who God is. And as we reflect on the things that bring stress to our lives and bring us to a place of feeling overwhelmed, bring us to a place of where we feel like, I don't know if I can go on, because there's more here than I can deal with. David's words are encouraging. You are a shield about me. You are the lifter of my head. You will defeat my enemies and you will save me. These become very real words to us. How hopeful and instructive they become because of the stressors that we face. If David could face what he faced, if David could find the hope-filled words that he's written in Psalm 3, then folks, there's hope for you and me. Hello? Can I say that to you again? There's hope for us. There is hope for us. If you are sitting in a place this morning where you are overwhelmed and where you are completely feeling outdistanced and outclassed by what you're working through in life, I want you to hear the words of David this morning and see how he dealt with things when his son Absalom led a rebellion against him. What was David's experience? We've already read it. How many are my foes? You know, I love this. He says, many are rising against me. Have you ever had your kids come to you and say, oh, Mom or Dad, I have to have this. All the kids have it. Right? So sometimes when we take a statement like this, many are the foes that are against me, there's a possibility for us to kind of be dismissive of that or not see it for what it is. David is looking at the people who have gathered against him in Jerusalem, and he's saying, many are the people who have come against me. Many are the people. Literally, thousands of people had gathered against David and were wanting him to be deposed as king. The numbers were overwhelming. 2 Samuel 15:6 says that Absalom had stolen the hearts of the people. Absalom was, and you know, David has responsibility here. David did not function well as a dad. He may have been a great king and a great soldier, but he wasn't the best of dads. And David missed an opportunity to do some repairing in his family. And because of that, Absalom, his son, was wounded very deeply. And Absalom decided to take matters into his own hands, ultimately resulting in this rebellion. And Absalom went about and stole away the hearts. Isn't it hard for us to grasp that Absalom could steal the hearts of the people of Israel from David? I mean, David was their boy. He was their guy. Remember when they said Saul has slain his thousands, but David has slain his 10,000s. How many times had David rescued the people of Israel from the trouble that they were in? Over and over and over. He had brought them to a place of prominence militarily. He had brought them to a place of prominence economically. At one point during David's reign as the king of Israel, the kingdom of Israel stretched from the Nile River all the way up to the northern part of the Mediterranean Sea, up to not Syria, can't remember the name, almost to what would today be modern-day Turkey. That was the size of the kingdom that David reigned over. And yet Absalom was able to win. Can you imagine how overwhelmed David felt at that? Can you imagine the pain in his heart as he began to reflect on what he had lost in the love of the people of Israel? And how to think that it happened by his own son. It was an overwhelming moment for David to try to cope with. 2 Samuel 15:12 tells us that David's personal counselor, a man by the name of Ahithophel, had been won over. That was a serious loss for David, because Ahithophel was one of David's most insightful, experienced, and trusted counselors. And as a matter of fact, if as the rebellion was unfolding, if Absalom had done what Ahithophel wanted him to do, Absalom would have probably killed David and stolen the kingdom. Because Ahithophel brought counsel to Absalom that would have won the day. That would have won the day. David's losses just kept increasing. And the scriptures talk about how Absalom's numbers kept increasing. When David writes, "Many are those who rise up against me," these were real people. And these were people who wanted David removed and Absalom to take over as king. Even worse was David's sense of vulnerability. Look at verses 3 and 4. Can we go? Let's see. Yes. "But you, O Lord, are a shield about me, my glory and the lifter of my head." The phrase, "my glory and the lifter of my head," is not a symbolic phrase. Because we're told that David literally slithered out of Jerusalem barefoot and his head covered. David was sneaking out of his own capital city like a slave and like a man literally running for his life. And so when David says, "Lord, you are a shield about me, my glory and the lifter of my head," David had lost his glory as the king. David had lost the position of honor that belonged to him and had to cover his head. What was David accustomed to doing? He was accustomed to having his head completely uncovered with an incredible crown on his head, indicating his glory. And yet, now he escapes stealthily out of Jerusalem. And I thought it was so interesting. He's barefoot. He's barefooted. No king goes about barefooted, except in his own palace. But he certainly wouldn't be seen out in the streets barefooted. David was in an amazingly vulnerable place. 2 Samuel 15:30 says this, "But David went up the ascent of the Mount of Olives, weeping as he went, barefoot and with his head covered. And all the people who were with him covered their heads, and they went up, weeping as they went." David had experienced an amazing fall from the pinnacle of national leadership. And it was led by his own son. There were other conditions that led to the rebellion. We've already kind of touched on those about David's poor fathering skills. But what I want you to see with me this morning is David's response to the stress. First of all, he says, "Lord, you are a shield about me. You are my glory, and you are the lifter of my head." It's interesting that this phrase, "my glory and the lifter of my head," is used often to encourage God's people in times of distress. Excuse me, not the glory and the lifter of the head, but the shield part. When Abraham went out to battle, God came to him after Abraham had defeated a number of kings, and his opening line to Abraham was this: "Abraham, I am your shield. I am your shield, and I am your very great reward." When other times in the Psalms, Psalm 119, verse 114, talks about God being a shield for us. Do you see what I mean? about this, we think, okay, God's a shield. God's going to be my protector. Hold it a minute. David was fighting a war. David was fighting a war. David was trying to find a way to get out of the city and not be killed. And so when David stands up and says, Lord, you are a shield about me, he takes that language out of some kind of symbolism and he puts it in very stark reality. But God, I am in an incredible place of vulnerability here, and I am trusting that you are going to be my shield. See, there are times, folks, when we're going to find ourselves there. That's what's so amazing about what David says. Because you may be in a place today where you are finding yourself very vulnerable. And the same promise that David is uttering here becomes a promise to you that God is a shield to you. That shield may be medical. That shield may be to protect your relationship in an office situation where perhaps your integrity or credibility have been questioned. But that He becomes a shield. And isn't it comforting for us to know that David is in this place because of his own mistakes? How many times do we beat ourselves up when we make mistakes and it results in bad stuff happening in our lives, and we kick ourselves in the backside saying, you know what, if I hadn't made a mistake, I wouldn't be here. And yet David is the one who made the mistakes. Absalom is the one who stole his kingdom from him, and David is still affirming, God, you are my shield. You are my shield. In the midst of it all, you, Lord, are my shield. David was clear as to where his strength was found. And it's interesting that he said these things. You know, it's easy for us to go, not easy, but I mean, we can go through a difficult season and get on the other side of it, and we can say, oh God, you've been so good to me. And it doesn't minimize the fact that He has. But folks, David's saying this while he's running out of the city for his life. While things aren't good. David is not writing this from a historical perspective. David is writing this because he's in the middle of what's going on. And he says, God, you're my shield. You're my shield. And you are my strength. He goes on and he says, Lord, you are my glory. Not only are we understanding that David had lost his glory, but listen to what he says, God, you are my glory. David was not enamored with being king. David wasn't bemoaning the fact that he had lost his kingdom. David was saying, God, you are my glory. You are enough for me, God. As a matter of fact, some of the people that David walked past as he was leaving the city threw stones at him and said, David, you're a man of blood. You have been a man of war, and you're just getting what belongs to you. And David said, you know what? Just leave him alone. Leave him alone. Because it could very well be that God is taking me away from my position. And David said, Lord, you're my glory. You're my glory. What does it take for us in our relationship with God where He becomes enough? What does it take for us where it's not Jesus plus this or that, it's Jesus plus nothing? Jesus plus nothing. I don't think we can get our minds around the fact of the magnitude of David's loss. King, you've lost power, you've lost your reputation, you've lost your respectability, you've lost your ability to defend yourself. Your family is horribly interrupted. And David says, but God, you're my glory. You're my glory, and you are the one who can restore to me all that I have lost and give back to me a sense of integrity. You're the one who lifts my head. You're the one who makes it so that I don't have to slink out of town with a hood over my head, barefoot. God, you're the one who restores me. And see, what makes all of this so important is that David has lost all of those very things. He has lost all of those very things. And he finds his strength in God. When faced with this incredible time of loss and this incredible time of stress and danger, David trusted himself, his position, his future, his life into God's hands. There's one last thing that David says that's worthy of our consideration, and it's actually the thing that first caught my attention as I was reading this psalm and made me go back and look again at what David was saying. And he says this, I lay down and slept. How well do you sleep when you're stressed? I chose that because that's a little bit of the innocence that we have to have. That's a little bit of the trust. Folks, God is speaking something so powerful to us this morning. God is speaking something so powerful to us today. You may be familiar with it, but will you let Him speak it fresh into your heart this morning? Because when you are overwhelmed, when stress is at red line levels, God isn't there in some symbolic kind of way. God is there in real, tangible, meaningful, transforming kinds of ways. That's what David is telling us in the midst of all of that. I lay down and slept. I woke again, for the Lord sustained me. I will not be afraid of many thousands of people who have set themselves against me all around. I know how I feel sometimes when I'm stressed. And I know that sometimes sleeping through the night is one of the first things that goes. Isn't it an amazing? Now, think of this. David's running for his life, which means he's sleeping on the ground, which means that his comfortable sleep is gone, which means that he's got to be worried about having enough guards to keep himself secure overnight. And yet David says, I lay down and slept. Folks, it's tangible. This is not symbolic. This is not illustrative. This is David saying, I was running for my life. And God, because I put my trust in you, I was able to lay down and sleep in the midst of it all. I was able to... I find that completely remarkable. And he didn't say he took a sleep aid. We see in David a place of trust and confidence available to those who will trust in God. It's akin to Daniel in the lion's den. It's akin to Paul and Silas singing at midnight in the prison and an earthquake happens and they're liberated from their prison. It's akin to Peter sleeping the night before his proposed execution in the early chapters of Acts. It's akin to Elisha talking to his servant who is anxious about the army that he sees around the city where they are. And Elisha says, Lord, open his eyes. Open his eyes. And when he did, he saw the armies of heaven around them. In the Psalms it says the angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him. He encamps around those who fear him. There is a call to all of us to learn to trust God in this way, in the very center of our stress. In the very center of our stress. That's why this little psalm was so powerful. As I read it, David models for us the place of safety and shelter that God provides. You know, we read in other places where the psalm writes about dwelling in the secret place and under the shadow of the Almighty, and all of that becomes very picturesque. But David says, guys, I was running for my life. And I was able to lay down and sleep the night that I escaped my certain death because I trusted God and because God was with me.